Welcome back to Beyond the Sermon with Hyde Park United Methodist. I'm Matt Hotho, the Director of Production and Online Engagement.
And I'm Magrey de Vega, the Senior Pastor.
That only took us 3 tries. Hey, Magrey, you just finished preaching a sermon about creation,
Right.
and you tied it to this big word of dominion. Can you recap the sermon for us?
Sure. Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, the very first command that God gives the first human beings, Adam and Eve, is to be fruitful, to multiply, and to subdue and have dominion over all of creation.
Yeah.
And so it's that word dominion that I sort of focused on, because if you interpret or misinterpret it in a certain way, you can actually take that command from God and be destructive and harmful and a bad steward of creation, as well as other people. And unfortunately, there's ample evidence that misinterpretation has been harmful in many ways throughout history.
Yeah, language is so tough in that way, right?
Right.
Because you take a word like dominion, and what other words come to mind in English, right? Dominate, control.
Right. Defeat, conquest.
Right.
Subdue.
All these other
decimate.
things. Exactly.
Destroy. Kill. You want to keep going?
You
there's
can.
a lot.
Yeah. You would be awesome.
Slaughter.
Wow. Okay.
Murder.
This is
ravage.
It's a really weird game of Pictionary. So one thing that's really helpful to do sometimes in Bible study is word studies.
Right.
And you can do that in English, which we just did. Actually, Magrey just showed a bunch of words that are in this word cloud around the idea of dominion. But if you know ancient languages, sometimes it can be really interesting. You go back to the actual word that was in the Hebrew that was Genesis 1.
Can you tell Matt's getting excited? This is right in his wheelhouse.
It is. And here's what's fun is actually I just re-downloaded a piece of software I used a lot in seminary called Accordance, which is a huge database that I bought into over seminary. It lets you basically use a computer interface to go through the text. Mm-hmm. So it makes word study really cool and quick.
This is me nodding my head, acting as excited
yes.
as he is.
So I'm going to bring this to something practical really quickly. So the Hebrew word for dominate is radah. And what you can do is you can go and look at everywhere in the Bible where radah shows up. And it's not a whole lot. It's actually a rather rare word, about 27 times. Okay. And one place where it shows up is in Leviticus, towards the end, where there's all these codes about how you're supposed to treat people around you. And radah is used this really interesting phrase. You shall radah over these people, but not ruthlessly. So go back to that word cloud of what dominate might mean. What does it mean to have dominion in a way that isn't ruthless?
Yeah, exactly. It's that qualifier, but not ruthlessly. That is an important qualifier every time we see either that word or that notion of dominating. That's an important qualifier, because all of a sudden when you see all sorts of ruthless acts by the Israelites in the name of God to subdue their enemies, that is not prescriptive for us today. Right. It is this whole notion of caring for, being good stewards of, acting with care, which is the opposite of ruthlessness. It's care, compassion, empathy, consideration. Mm-hmm. That's what it means to have dominion over something. It means to be a steward of it. It's entrusted to your care. That's what it means to have dominion over something.
Yes. And so I think that's where we can jump right back into creation. And so, Magrey, this is where I would have a question for you is, what then does it look like for someone to care for creation if we're called to have dominion over it in a way that isn't ruthless?
It's a great question. So you may remember a couple of years ago, we did a worship series to start the year. I think it was 2022 or something, on the 7 days of creation.
Yeah.
It's the first time I teased out this notion of what it means to have dominion over creation. And I was really struggling over this. And I had a conversation with one of my clergy friends, Scott Smith, who's here in the Florida Conference over in Ormond Beach. And I said, Scott, what would you do with this text? Because I can't seem to get out of my head any notion of dominion than the things that we talked about. And he gave me a great metaphor. Now, it's not a perfect metaphor, but he gave me a great metaphor to say, what does a wine steward, what does a vineyard, what do you call those? A vineyard guy.
A winemaker.
A winemaker. What does a winemaker do with grapes? And I said, well, he crushes the grapes. And he said, yeah, and that could be a way of looking at dominion, but not in that kind of crushing kind of way. What do you do with a grape when you crush it? You release its beauty. You release its potential. You observe its majesty, its grandeur, the way it is meant to be, and then you release its full potential for people. And I think that may be a part of what it means to be a steward of creation. Not that you're crushing creation. So let's get that kind of violent notion out of the way. But you are tending to it, and you are a steward of it in a way that you release its full potential to offer beauty and goodness to all of creation. And I think that's a helpful metaphor. So that when I am called to be a steward of creation, it doesn't mean that I'm using it for my own benefit. I'm using it to extract its full goodness and its full beauty, because as I say in the sermon, it all teaches us about who God is, a God of beauty and a God of wonder.
Bringing this down to a really sort of personal level, there is a movement among some people who let their yards go natural in some ways, right? They don't have that nicely manicured St. Augustine lawn with, fertilizer and all those kind of chemicals on it. They actually just let it grow naturally.
Sure.
And they kind of, they control it in some ways, so that it kind of stays within certain boundaries, maybe an HOA or something like that. But what you notice over time, what these people notice over time, is that things like butterflies return, bees return, some flowers return, things that are natural to our Florida environment return when it's not just controlled in such a way like our modern lawns are.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful metaphor, that it reminds us of just how wonderful and wild and majestic creation can be when we allow it to live into its full potential. And it's a reminder to us as human beings that as much as we try to manicure ourselves into being a certain way so that we can present ourselves with the kind of polish and panache that we want to present ourselves in, at our core, we are connected to creation. Yeah. We are all part of the same family of creation that God made.
All right, we've got two different directions we can go in this conversation.
Okay.
So pick a number between 1 and 10, and if you're close to my number, we'll go this direction, and if you're far, we'll go this direction. I've got my number in my head. Go.
We have never played this game before. There's a lot of pressure. This seems like one of those choose your own adventures.
Yeah, that is exactly what it's like.
Where if you choose to go to page 40. This is entirely my point. You want to go option A, you go to page 48.
Yes.
If you go to option B, you go to page 12. So I'm going to choose the lower of the two numbers.
Okay. So then we are going to go in the practical. We're not going to go to scripture.
Okay.
But my number was lower. My number was less than 5. So you said the lower number. So I'm just going to assume you would have picked a number somewhere between 1 and 5, which would put you closer to the number. Anyways, all that to say,
I hate this game.
We're going practical.
Okay.
All right. So here's the practical question.
Yeah.
Last year we went through 2 hurricanes.
Yeah.
Right. Last year our community was pretty wrecked by creation.
Right.
There are probably people watching this right now who are living in a different home because of creation.
Right.
What do you say to the person who wonders, where is God when creation is sort of dominating us?
Yeah.
And creation feels out of control, or even in some ways vengeful against us.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought you said this was a practical question. This is a very deep theological question.
Sorry, the other one was going to be more scriptural.
What was the theological one?
Oh, dude. You don't want, you gotta.
I'm glad I didn't pick
You're
the
going to have to rent the book
number.
from the library again.
Well, the way to approach that biblically is to say there are natural disasters all throughout the scriptures. Yeah. And what's interesting is you talked about a word study. When I was in seminary, my Old Testament professor had us do a word study on the word sea, S-E-A, like the body of water. Yeah. And it took all semester for us to do an in-depth study of every time any reference to the body of water called the sea was mentioned in the Old Testament, just the Old Testament. And it was there that we discovered that the sea is personified as some force that seems greater than ourselves. Yeah. So you talk about hurricanes, Helene and Milton and Debbie. In the Old Testament, the sea is a ferocious reality that reminds people, the people of God especially, of how little they are in control. Now, what's interesting is that whenever there is the influence of sea, God is presented as even greater than the sea. Now, I know that gets into a theologically sticky wicket when it comes to hurricanes, because we wanted to try to believe that God was stronger than the hurricane. But theologically speaking, God shows up every time something as ferocious as the sea happens. And we saw that in the wake of Helene and Milton, that God showed up, maybe not in the eye of the hurricane, because God is not responsible for those kinds of natural disasters, but in the way that God showed up to give us inner resilience showed us solidarity with one another, to show us precautions to make in our homes for the next hurricane season, that God always shows up in solidarity, which, by the way, God's influence over the sea in the Old Testament is an essential theological precursor for baptism. So whenever we have baptism, we recount in the prayer over the water the number of times that God shows up in the water, that God saved Noah in the flood and put in the clouds a rainbow. When God saw people as slaves in Egypt, God led them to freedom through the sea, the Red Sea and the Jordan River. When the time was right, Jesus was born in the sea, the water of Mary's womb. And of course, Jesus was baptized by John, called his disciples, and calls us today. That's just a glimpse of the number of times. We can go into Leviathan. We can go into all the storms, both in the Old and the New Testament, where people were saved from shipwrecks. So all this to say, natural disasters is not a foreign idea to the people of God, certainly not to us. The question is, God is always there in the midst of us, in the midst of that tempest, in order to show us comfort, courage, and solidarity.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. I think that's a great, also way to understand God's work all throughout Scripture too, and the way that the ancient people understood God at work in creation.
Right.
So
I'm glad I didn't pick the higher number. Lord.
I think that's a good place to kind of wrap up our conversation for today. So thank you all for joining us. We're launching a lot of our fall activities starting pretty soon. So if you want to get into Disciple Bible Study and learn more about all this biblical stuff we've been talking about, if you've got youth or children that want to get involved in programming, if you just want to find out more about our church, you can go to hydeparkumc.org/next steps, and we'd love to invite you to some of our activities coming up. I'm Matt Hotho.
And I'm Magrey and Mat.
And we'll see you next time. Hey, did you want to know what that second one was going to be?
Yeah.
Okay. So the other option would have been diving into wisdom literature. And
we didn't even mention that. It's all right. It's all good.
What do you think? I mean, so you kind of referenced the Job passage where God kind of gets mad at Job, right?
Right.
And I was actually reading some Midrash as well. That was a really fun time I had over there, just kind of prepping while you were preaching.
That's good.
But the Midrash gets into this idea of how Midrash, by the way, is rabbis would read the Old Testament and then basically write mini sermonettes on the Old Testament, and all this stuff was preserved. So we have these stories they wrote interpreting this. And they were like, oh man, this Job story in wisdom literature is so cool because in Genesis 1, you've got humanity at almost its highest point, right? With God saying, let us create them and give them dominion. And in Job, the thing just totally flips.
Absolutely.
And Job is the smallest of humanity. Humanists at their weakest.
That's right.
And God at God's strongest.
Right.
Getting to just tell humanity what's up.
That's right.
So what do you do with those wisdom literature stories? Not what do you do with them as if they're problematic, but more so how do we understand what's happening in those wisdom literature stories when God is just going, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth?
It's the same dynamic at play in different ways. So it's the same theme, it just with different content with both Job and Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. So Job inverts the power structure of the universe. As you said, humans are not at the top, God is at the top. With Proverbs, it's an inversion of cause and effect, where we believe that we can impact consequences just by our own behavior. If I live a good life, then I will get good things. Proverbs begins to test that and invert that, and it's seen in full fruition in Ecclesiastes, where Ecclesiastes inverts our sense of time, where we always think that time is linear. There's a past and a present and a future. Ecclesiastes says time is circular. So every time you feel like what you do today can impact what happens tomorrow, you need to realize that what goes around comes around, and you are part of a cycle. You are part of a pattern where sometimes good things happen and then sometimes bad things happen, but that's just the reality. And there's actually something redemptive in that notion of circular time. So that's what the wisdom literature does. It takes all of our preconceived notions, all of our presuppositions, and twists them and turns them and flips them upside down to where by the time we get through it and into the prophets and then into the New Testament, all of our frames are bent to where we're now open to surprise.
Cool.
Were we recording that?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a little bonus part of our Beyond the Sermon. So you got to see what happened down path 2 of our conversation, where it could have gone. And if you like that stuff about wisdom literature, in 2026, in the fall, we're going to be doing a whole series on the wisdom literature. And you've got a book coming out on Ecclesiastes.
I am. Thanks for reminding me. It's due in a few months.
Oh boy.
On Ecclesiastes. It's called A Time for Wisdom, Finding Hope in Ecclesiastes.
For real though, we're done this time. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Bye.